Hi, and thanks for listening to All Kinds of Minds, a podcast dedicated to celebrating neurodiversity in our world. My name is James Valetti, and I volunteer as the head of podcast for Welcome Neurodiversity. On today's episode, we are celebrating disabilities and neurodiversity in film with our guest Isaac Zablocki, who is the founder and CEO of the ReelAbilities Film Festival taking place April 3rd to the 9th in New York City. For more information about ReelAbilities, you can visit their website at reelabilities.org or their Instagram at reelabilitiesny. Isaac, who's also neurodivergent, attended film school at Columbia University, worked at Miramax Films, and is now the director of film programming at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. He's produced and directed a number of feature films and has developed film education programs at the JCC Israel Film Center. And he's also involved with the programming of multiple different festivals throughout the world, including the acclaimed Other Israel Film Festival about Arab and minority populations in Israel. We're thrilled to have him on as a guest today, and we hope you enjoy this episode of All Kinds of Minds. Isaac, thank you so much for being here on All Kinds of Minds and joining us today with Welcome Neurodiversity. It's really a pleasure to have you, and I'm so happy to hear about ReelAbilities.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to share more about ReelAbilities.
Awesome. So let's start there. Tell us about what ReelAbilities is for those who don't know, and what are some of its goals? Why did you start it?
So ReelAbilities is the leading disability film festival in the world, actually. And it's a film festival that presents high quality films that I would say in comparison to any great film out there, and tells stories of disabilities across the different spectrums. So we cast a really wide net in terms of what we consider disability to be and want to be as inclusive space as possible. We, of course, make our presentations as accessible as possible and are always learning new ways to be more inclusive in terms of accessibility, and try to bring the community together, try to celebrate our community, the disability community, and at the same time also bridge gaps with the mainstream community that might not be as comfortable with disability.
What made you want to start it? Like, what initially made you want to kick it off 17 years ago?
So disability has been a part of my life and something that I'm very comfortable with. And I came from a world, there's some spaces that do not include disability at all. I was not from that space, and obviously saw it as a really, obvious kind of space to explore. And I saw that there weren't a lot of films being shown about the disability community, and thought this would be a great theme. Instead of showing films that are overexposed, better to show films that people are not seeing, that are worth seeing. So as luck would have it, I would meet my co-founder, Anita Altman, who we met at a comedy club by chance one night, and was leading a whole network of disability organizations. And she had the same idea, and we made it happen. And from the start, she brought in this concept of having partnerships and bringing the community as one of the resources that are helping establish this festival. And that has been something that's like in our DNA and very much a part of it, that we're not just like, an organization that runs in a vacuum, but we run with the community and love to, after you're seeing an amazing movie about a certain topic, you should know about the organizations that are doing the work relevant to this topic.
And how many cities are you in now?
It keeps changing, but we've been in dozens of cities across the U.S. So what happened was after the first year of the festival, it took off, and we started hearing from other cities that they wanted to do this as well. Now, you can't just start a disability film. Well, maybe you can, but we were like, okay, if you're serious about it, if you're willing to really invest in this, and you have to raise funds, this is not an easy festival to put on. This is not like the horror film festival that might have a built-in audience. This is an audience that you need to build, and it took a few years, but eventually it was Cincinnati actually that was the first city to come on board and say we're gonna put some muscle behind it, and they did, and they helped. Actually, that expanded it, and we said, okay, we have all these great films. Let's package them. We've created the accessibility for these films. We have the relationships with the filmmakers. let's actually just like sign agreements with them that they could be a part of the national program. And that just kept, and we get weekly requests from other cities, and have developed ways to make it really easy for other cities to duplicate or replicate ReelAbilities in their own way.
That's amazing. So the process of other film festivals, you don't oversee those yourself, those actual film festivals essentially, right? Like you don't travel out there and do all of the legwork. It's other people who are kind of like producing it essentially.
Exactly. It's kind of like a franchise model, though we don't get any kickbacks. And it's other cities that have a lead organization that run it. We provide them the films, the accessibility, the model that we use, the every resource that we have. So, a website and whatever else we can give to them. But it's really each city runs it in its own way. And we actually also recognize that every city is not New York City. So, we believe in that flexibility of within this franchise that you don't have to be exactly the same.
That's amazing. So ballpark over 17 years, 25 cities, 30 cities, 150.
At least 25 off the top of my head. And really, I'd say most of the major cities in the US, though sometimes we hear from smaller towns too.
That makes me really happy. So one of the things that I've heard you talk about in the past is the pillars that make ReelAbilities very special. Do you mind chatting a little bit about what those are and how those have evolved from when the film festival started to today?
So I think some of them I've mentioned already.
Yes, you have. Absolutely.
And really, like, partnerships, high quality films, accessibility, our approach to disability is really crucial. And that's something that keeps changing. At the very beginning of ReelAbilities, we probably showed films that might not necessarily be included today, in terms of the way disability is represented. We've always taken a progressive approach, but this is something that's also been evolving. And when we say progressive approach, we mean we look for first-person stories. We look for stories that are really responsible. We believe in authenticity and elevating authenticity, and actually the stories being told from an authentic place, and actually having not an outsider space, but having someone in the film making process really be part of that experience. So you know what you're talking about, and it's not coming. I think one of the places that Hollywood has done a lot of damage to the disability community is that sometimes they didn't speak to anybody from the community. And I think that needs to be a major part of the filmmaking process. And it doesn't mean that, the director has to have a disability. I think sometimes it's about the writer, the producer, one of the lead artistic sources for the film to be a part of the community that's being represented. So you actually, and of course, everybody's experience is different, and we recognize that. And it doesn't, just because you're representing this authentically doesn't mean you're representing this for everybody. You have the right to your experience.
That's actually a really interesting point that I was kind of giving some thought to, was how do you represent something authentically when it's different for everybody? Do you find it challenging to be kind of the gatekeeper in some ways of what authenticity is for this film festival? And how do you deal with that? Is there a selection committee that really weighs these kinds of options? Talk to me about that process of how you balance being the gatekeeper with being authentic.
So it's really challenging. And again, I think it's about being responsible. I don't think it's about I don't believe in a black and white authenticity, and we judge each film for its merit. And, each film has its own story of how it was made, how it was conceived, what efforts they made. And sometimes it's really about showing that effort. Like, to me, I'm always saying that one of the key elements of accessibility is actually, first and foremost, having an accessible attitude. And that's true, I think, also for how things need to be made responsibly. It's having, taking an attitude that's like, wait a minute, I want to make sure that an underserved community is actually being heard, and not me telling them what to say or what to experience. So that's I think, the first step in the process. And we have a committee, a very diverse committee to come from different sides of the disability work, the film world, the all from all different walks of life, ages, and we definitely consult very strongly and listen to them quite seriously. Often they help make decisions that I will disagree with, but understand that this is the right thing to do, and this is how a committee is feeling. Everybody has different opinions. Nobody agrees. We've never had a full consensus with the committee. Okay, sometimes we do, but often, it could be the film that's everybody's favorite, and then one person is like, "No, I did not like the representation there," or "I did not like the acting," or "I did not like," and we're all like, "No, the acting was fantastic." That's what we. So you see how these different perspectives are important, and it's not that you're looking for consensus, but looking for really, the right voices to rise to the top from this process.
It's kind of the beauty of art, right? I mean, just the subjectivity of it and how one person thinks it's great and the other's like, that was the biggest steaming pile of, cinematic dung I've ever seen in my life,
And the important part is also to recognize that these different opinions exist there. I think we live in a very polarized world where each side is not listening to the other side. And sometimes we experience this with ReelAbilities. Oh, you're not accepting our approach to disability, then you are erased. And I think, there is especially with the disability community, there's so much complexity. There's so much nuance. There's not one right way. Actually, sometimes there's accessibility friction. Sometimes, what's good for one person is actually bad for the other person. So saying that this is right for the community is never the case. There's different approaches, and I think we all need to take it down a few notches and really be accepting. And that's why this approach of just trying to be, I mean, there's nothing wrong with kindness and trying to be responsible and to really understand that there's different approaches to every story and to disability in general. There's no definitive approach, and to be open to it, I think is important. And one of the nice things about a festival is because we're not just showing one film, we're showing many films. You could have something for everyone. You could have multiple approaches.
Yeah. And how many films do you have programmed for this year?
I think we're just locking them in. I think we're up to about 35 films, which is
that's great.
We can't fit them in. We are in yesterday I had a meeting about this and I'm like, we got to add another day. No, there's a logistical problem with adding another day. I'm like, we're just not able to fit all these films in. And we have to say no. I say this all the time. We have to say no to great films constantly. We had on our short list about 100 films that all qualify in terms of quality, how much our committee liked it, and had everything we needed there. But still, there's just not enough slots, and we have to make hard decisions.
And there's probably you're probably up against a lot of challenges with spaces as well, and what is accessible and what's not.
And let me talk about spaces for a minute. So yes, I mean it's a huge factor. First of all, I was dealing with a film. We deal with films being released in other spaces, not through ReelAbilities all the time, and we're seeing that there will be a film about somebody who's a wheelchair user, so that obviously has a connection to that community, and most theaters have 1 to 5 tops, wheelchair accessible seats. And they're usually not great seats. And that is such a challenge. To our closing night last year, we had 40 wheelchair users. So this is something that we definitely pay attention to. And our main location is the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan on the Upper West Side, which is one of the few spaces in New York that has both great projection, because we don't want to make any compromises. There was one year we tried to be in as many locations as possible, and we got up to above 40 locations within New York.
Wow.
And then we made a decision. We need spaces that, first of all, quality control. Can present. You're not a library that's wheeling out a screen on a cart and pressing play. It's not the kind of film festival. We are, trying to be a film festival that makes no compromises in terms of quality. The second element, of course, was partners that could actually really give the level of accessibility. So we show all of our films with open captions. We provide audio description for all of our films, and that means without asking, like, does this one have or not have? No, all of them will have, no matter what, you're coming into an accessible experience. And that means, you have to have the technology to be able to present these films with all of the accessibility aids. And it also means that the space itself, and it also means the approach. You have the staff that's going to come. And a couple of years ago, we made this shift in our approach. We're big believers in universal design, that we want everybody to feel welcome. So you could come in without asking. Everybody's going to come in the same way, walk up the same ramp to get to the same space together. But we also had to implement something called individual design, because sometimes you need somebody, and that I think is the most important step in accessibility, saying, how can we make this experience more accessible to you on a personal level? And that might mean that, you need that space to leave. You might need a place where you can keep your battery charged, where you can, where the light is more accessible to you. And we try to serve, can't do everything, but we definitely do try to serve that. And we need spaces that know how to take that approach and to provide that level of customer service, I'll call it.
I think that's great. And especially, in a city like New York, where wherever it's all tight spaces, there, no matter, it's a real dearth of extra space to be able to make things accessible. It's a huge challenge. So thanks for sharing that. What are some of the most memorable films over the course of the 17 years, or impactful ones that stand out in your mind?
I don't love choosing between my children, but
I know.
I'll do it. Now, there's definitely... Okay, so first of all, I personally love films that are not about the disability, but rather, and we have plenty of films that, are like, let's talk about disability. But sometimes it's just films that are about the film, they're about the story, and happen to be inclusive in a thoughtful way where it's like baked in to the film. There was a film called The View from Tall that I, for some reason, always go to as one of my favorites from years ago. I'm sure it's out there somewhere now. It had a couple of recognizable stars in it. Really great indie, just like, I'm a big fan of, like, American independent films that are dialogue driven and well acted. So it had all of that. It happened to be that the psychologist in the film was in a wheelchair, and he's kind of like, the main counterpart to this young woman who is, it's called A View from Tall. She's a tall woman. She stands out. She's kind of like, different in a different way. And their bond on the differences that they experience makes this film work. And it's just like, nuanced and beautiful, and one of those great films that didn't get the attention it deserves.
I'll have to check it out. I'd actually love to come to the festival this year because I'll be in New York. So I'm really excited about that.
What advice would you... And it gives me a chance to plug our dates, which are April 3rd to the 9th.
Yes, of course. As far as filmmakers go, what advice would you give to a filmmaker who's interested in actively and authentically representing disabilities on screen and in film?
Probably the pointers I give to any filmmaker of be honest, be creative at the same time, be yourself, know who you are and what you're making. Don't try, the worst thing is when you're trying to do something that you're not. That's like, anyone can smell that artificiality. So it's really about making that film making your film in an honest way to yourself of who you are and what you're capable of. Don't try to make a Star Wars film if you're not George Lucas or, somebody of that caliber. So, and that relates to disability too. Like, make the disability, tell your story in your way with your kind of responsible approach to it. And I'd say also, of course, if you're not coming from there, do the research and make sure that the community is a part of your film in so many different ways. I'm even like, even a film that's like not made by the disability community, if you made the efforts to include the disability in the process, the disability community in the process, in a real important way, I think that's great. But I think also look at the mistakes that have been made in terms of disability film. Unfortunately, way too many of them. The tropes in Hollywood continue to be problematic, and despite a lot of good work being done as well, and we've definitely seen huge progress in our 17 years. But I think I think it's about not being afraid to tell the disability story and understand that a human story is going to be relevant to everyone, and disability is nuanced and not, not the cliches that are often put out there as like in either being extremely a super character or an evil character, but rather, part of the, fabric of our community.
Yeah. I was going to ask, and you probably don't like to point, much like you don't like picking your favorite children of the films. Are there any recent films that are indicative of kind of what you just said, where the disability really is not authentically replicated, or they're a certain kind of character, or there's a cliche? Like,
Yeah, I'm always careful not to call out
I
films, especially in a negative way. I think
yeah,
it goes against some of my values, it's, I mean, it's there, and there's definitely films that I've mentioned, and some, like, enough time has gone by also that it's okay. Like, think about all the films that are out there where, first of all, disability is used for inspiration, and that is like, like, the disability should not be in the inspiration. It's actually the inspiring acts that should be inspirational. Like, that is not the drama there. The drama, and I always look for good drama and good storytelling, shouldn't just be that, that the person managed to do something very simple, even though they have a disability. The other thing that often happens within the cliches, I mean, like, I often go to the Rain Man example, which, enough time has gone by,
yeah.
and I think, like, back then it was totally acceptable. And Dustin Hoffman is really one of the greatest treasures of our time, and did a good job. The only thing is, it tells, ultimately, that was the only autism story being told then. So till this day, just this weekend, I was talking to a family member of mine who has a strong connection to autism through a relative, and he was like, "Yeah, you always think that, oh, you have autism. Let's, like, let's show that talent. Count cards, be able to suddenly play chess. And that's not what autism is." And that movie had a huge influence on people's perception of autism, and that definitely continues till this very day. And I think, there's, autism savant definitely exists, which is what's represented there, but it's very, 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 very rare, almost as rare as anything. It's the 1 in a billion. And we need to show examples of what's actually out there, which is a much larger percentage of our society, and people should know about, and people should understand that that's what autism can be, and how diverse autism can be as well. So this is these are definitely the stories that I hope we'll see more of, those nuances.
Absolutely. I appreciate your sharing that. It just helps even me just kind of think about how is the way that we tell stories, how does it impact larger communities, and what other pieces of heart are there in the film that we can latch onto that are more than just the disability.
And by the way, there's the other side of, like, the tragic cliches of disability, and not every disability story has to be tragic. Doesn't mean it has to be overly, uplifting and everything's great. But there is a lot of, there's definitely a whole genre of, like, the tragic disability films, and, often ended in suicide, that, life is not worth living with a disability. And I don't think that's the message we want to give. And it's more like share the fullness of life that exists within the disability world.
That's great. So how can people get involved with the ReelAbilities Film Festival? What are the multitude of ways?
So many ways. First of all, we're a nonprofit. So we actually just became our own nonprofit. We were, under another organization at first. And in the last year, we've become our own nonprofit. So that's a space where, of course, people can make donations, people can volunteer, people can bring in partnerships. We're a small team running a huge ship, and we could use all the support we can get, and definitely on our website, if you go to ReelAbilities.org, you could see how you can partner, volunteer, or donate.
So ReelAbilities.org, and the festival is April 3rd to the 9th. And I know that you identify as neurodivergent as well. Are you willing to share a little bit about what that's like for you?
So first of all, I love the term, and that's a new term for me, relatively, like, probably in the last 5 years that I've been able to adopt that term. And I think it actually better represents who I am because I have a specific learning disabilities that I felt were like framed in a box. Like, it was a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and check the boxes on like a neuropsych. And by the way, all the men in my family, this is obviously genetic and inherited it. And the bottom line was, it still is. And by the way, my son also has inherited my my learning disability, which I see also how it represents itself in such an interesting way. We're wired a little bit differently, and that affects so many things. That can affect your way you interact with the space around you. And it's something that has definitely been very, very present for me my whole life. I used to think it was because I was the one redhead in my family that it made me like stand out. But I think there's just different. I'm not a redhead anymore, unfortunately. I wish I was the one redhead. I wish, right? But just neurodivergence really just shows a little bit more. I think better represents how we are just wired a little differently, and it relates to everything. It relates, I see where that gets represented in autism. I see that where that gets represented with my ADHD. And the way we approach the world, it, by the way, is completely why I'm in the film world, because film always spoke to me. I've put all the dots together recently, and have realized that in second grade, my parents found my report card a couple of years ago, and I got an F in spelling and handwriting. They gave a second grader an F I have a second grader right now. Her handwriting is terrible, beautiful, but because exactly, try to help the kid, but that was not the educational approach when I was a kid, and did well in other topics, and like my math, I was an A, and that was something that was easy for me. But what I remember from second grade was the first time I got showed a movie in school, and back then it was pre how easy it is to show movies. We didn't have screens in every room. And they showed the film The Red Balloon, which is a movie that changed my life and stays with me as an inspiration that was so deep. And that is possibly why ReelAbilities was started, because, that is a movie that taught me not to bully and to accept differences, and to see somebody who interacts with the world in a different way and to be able to relate to that. And all of those are elements that have been a part of who I am and what ReelAbilities, I think, tries to be. And it stayed with me so impactfully that it also just shows how powerful film could be. And maybe, I like to think that film impacts everybody, but maybe it also just impacted me so deeply because letters on a page don't impact me as much in that way as the imagery and movies do. That's how I'm wired. I, by the way, I kind of like purposely have not watched it since the second grade. So
Really?
So I hope it's everything I remember it to be. But it's
I'll let you know. I'll watch it, and
I'm sure it's on YouTube at this point.
Well, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for being a guest. The ReelAbilities Film Festival is April 3rd to the 9th, reelabilities.org. Make sure that you go see movies, donate, partner up, do whatever you can to support this amazing endeavor. So, Isaac, thank you again for joining us. I'm so appreciative of it.
Thank you so much.